Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Warcraft video. Today we're going to be returning to the development of World of Warcraft to discuss some of the content and features that did not make it into the final game. Content can be cut for loads of reasons, and many of those are actually good for the game. Why develop something that doesn't seem fun? Why work on something when the man hours could be shifted onto something that's, maybe a bit more fun, maybe a bit better? And then of course game development is often a series of very hard decisions for those who are in the leadership roles, who have to make the tough calls, what to cut, what not to cut, and it's important to talk about topics like this with just tempering it with an understanding of the wider picture and that sometimes stuff needs to be cut for the greater good. Now today's target is Wrath of the Lich King, the expansion that saw World of Warcraft's highest ever player count of 12.1 million. It was absolutely massive and contained some of the most memorable raids in the game's history with Ulduar and Icecrown Citadel, but it was not without its fair share of drama, tough decisions on the part of the developers, and just general controversy and interest. So, let's kick this video off with Azjol-Nerub. While we did see plenty of the Nyrubians in Wrath of the Lich King, it wasn't actually how the developers originally intended things to be. Wrath of the Lich King shipped with two Nyrubian dungeons located underneath Dragonblight. You had Azjol-Nerub, and then you had Ahn'kahet, the Old Kingdom. Now, while these were visually really impressive dungeons and had really big environments outside them, they were only a sliver of what was originally intended. Azjol-Nerub was intended overall to be a questing zone in Wrath of the Lich King, an expansion that already had quite a few questing zones. Spanning a seemingly massive area, it would have told the story of the Nyrubians in a lot more detail than what we actually saw in the game, potentially going into a lot more detail about their leadership, rebel factions, and a more in-depth look at who they are and why and what their relationship to the Lich King is. Most of the Nyrubians, of course, as we know, were scourged, so they were killed, reanimated in the Lich King's service. However, Ahn'kahet contains a faceless one, a servant of Yogg-Saron, who was beaten back, of course, in patch 3.1, but it is yet another connection between Arthas and the Old Gods, so it could have been very interesting to see that part of the story be played out in more depth and be expanded upon. Further to this, the various relatives of the Nyrubians, of course, are all Old God servants. The lore of this is that they were all a part of the Akir Empire way back, which was eventually broken up in a war with the ancient trolls. The remnants then gathered around various Old God locations, with the Nyrubians being near Yogg-Saron, the Mantid being near Y'Shaarj, and the Kiraj being near Cthulhu, down in Silithus. There is then the renegade faction of Nyrubians that you see as quest givers in the area, which is potentially hinting that there may have been a player-friendly faction, maybe someone who we would have been helping out in the zone, perhaps taking part in their rebellion. Hell, they could have done something like the Mantid, where the Mantid were actually friendly to us, or at least a faction of them were friendly to us, but they were still in the service of the Old Gods, which could have been a cool bit of plot for us to experience. Later on in Cataclysm, of course, Blizzard then added an NPC called Seer Ixit, who basically tasks people with killing Elder Naddox, who is the first boss in the Old Kingdom dungeon, so that he can then take leadership of his people. Now, Ixit has a stash of Nyrubian eggs, so there's actually set up here for Blizzard to reintroduce the Nyrubians into an expansion in the future, should they see fit. It does seem like the loss of this questing zone, though, was kind of hard for the developers, with Ghostcrawler stating that it is personally the bit of content that he was the saddest about having to cut. Gundrak also has to be mentioned here. He was one of the most important characters, or, well, one of the important-ish characters in Warcraft 3, and it was strange how he was treated in Wrath, reduced to a quick dungeon kill. Blizzard themselves actually regretted this, and they then made him the final boss of the Trial of the Champion raid instance, and, we do have some old blue posts referencing Gundrak being a primary character for player interaction, and also being an important character outside of raiding. But sadly, we didn't really get to see that, and we have very little else to go on as to what his role in the expansion may have been. Next up, we've got the sad case of Crystalsong Forest. While the zone did make it into the final game, very few of its contents did. This was primarily due to technical reasons and the famous Dalaran lag. Now, you might know it if you didn't play back then, but both frame rates and latency would just fall to pieces in Dalaran. Now, the Argent Tournament, which was added in patch 3.1 and then completed in 3.2, was also going to be placed in Crystalsong Forest, but it had to be moved up to Nicecrown because of this resource issue with Dalaran. Now, this is a problem that Blizzard were able to solve in Warlords of Draenor with the garrisons. So, Dalaran was originally located inside Crystalsong, both, I believe, literally and in the game world, but also in terms of the server architecture. Now, I don't 100% know the setup, but whatever it was, we know that it resulted in this problem. Warlords of Draenor got around this by having your garrison actually be located, logically speaking, in another continent, as far as the game's map layout and all of that stuff. Essentially, all of the non-instanced Northrend content was kind of located on that one Northrend map, whereas the garrison itself was located on a separate map, and then Blizzard transitioned you smoothly over so that it would not be noticeable. The result of this is that the garrison could exist on its own without causing any issues for the playability of the Shadowmoon Valley zone. Now, of course, this didn't stop the servers from, crashing for the garrisons during the Warlords launch, but what you will have noticed is it was going into the garrisons where you experience the problems, i.e. that supposedly smooth transition, and not just general terribleness in Shadowmoon, even though it was pretty laggy. Now, plot-wise, we do have some background on the zone. It was the site of a massive battle between the Black and Blue Dragons during the War of the Ancients. During Wrath of the Lich King, Blizzard's overall intention was that the Sun Reavers and Silver Covenant would be fighting over the abandoned Night Elf ruins in the area. Of course, we got the 2 bases which showed this, but we didn't get any actual content. Now, given the history of the Blue Flight, I also would have expected to see more of the Magic War take place in this zone, one of the plot points which really was a bit smaller than you would have thought in Wrath. One has to wonder if more was planned for the Magic Zone, or the Magic War, especially in this zone. The main reason why Dalaran was moved over to Northrend was to fight Malygos, who of course was a threat to the mages, yet it really ended up being a small plot thread in comparison to others, so perhaps more of this was originally supposed to play out in Crystalsong Forest, given how it's supposedly all drowned in magical energy. I think it really is unfortunate that this happened. It's one of the most unique and beautiful looking zones in the entire game. Which, really sad that we didn't get to do more content there. It would have been a nice break from, I think, a lot of the other Wrath of the Lich King zones and perhaps their themes. Alright, next we've got Gundrak. Now, I remember this being really puzzling to me back at the time. Gundrak is a massive bit of geometry when you actually see it in the world, yet we only get one dungeon there. This is one of the most widely rumoured bits of planned content for Wrath of the Lich King, but I've yet to find a direct source from Blizzard that says this was supposed to be a thing, so really do take this with a pinch of salt, but seriously, it's all over the internet. Now, the current Gundrak dungeon is only a small side structure just beside the main temple, which, we don't get actually access to the main temple. Looking at it, you can see that it's easily large enough for there to be a big raid instance there. Now, the dungeon doesn't actually end in the death of their leader, Frostlord Malak, who was later killed in Mists of Pandaria's Throne of Thunder during the Council of Elders fight. But, that said, the canon is kind of messy here. The Drakari Empire itself was said to have fallen to the Scourge in the patch 4.1 trailer, so who knows what's going on with the trolls there. Most notably, though, this did mean that Wrath of the Lich King did not have a troll raid. Now, my personal take in this is that they probably did early on want to put a raid there in this, sort of early on in the expansion's development, but that probably what happened is it didn't get too far along. Perhaps the art team, they really knew what that zone was supposed to be anyway, so they were developing the geometry, but, that was really as far as it got, probably. That's at least what my suspicion is, and I think that does seem to be a very plausible thing. Now, the next thing is flying combat, and this is another one that I definitely remember, because it seems to have been cut really late into development, and it was even on the gameplay feature trailer and the box, on the inside of the box, of the retail copies of Wrath of the Lich King. Now, as great as digital is, one thing that doing this video is reminding me is I really do like those old big box PC games, or even the smaller equivalents like the WoW ones. But anyway, this whole combat, flying combat feature was supposed to be something in Wintergrass for PvP, but it was canned. At the time, Blizzard had of course been pushing the new vehicle system that was seen quite a lot in Wrath and used pretty well by the game's questing, at least in comparison to what they've been able to do in some of the past expansions. Now, while we didn't get to dogfight gnomish aircraft over Wintergrasp, that, like what was shown in the gameplay shot, we technically do have this feature covered, kind of, by a Howling Fjord quest where the mechanic was used for PvE. Now, of course, there's the rather infamous Oculus dungeon, which I actually loved back then for whatever weird reason. There's the Eye of Eternity raid, they both used vehicles. They kept vehicles going in Ulduar with the Flame Leviathan, and then later with the horse mechanic in patch 3.2's Argent Tournament. Since then, we've seen the vehicle stuff used a lot more sparingly in group content due to its rather mixed reception from players. I think that the idea of the PvP dogfighting is a really cool one, but honestly, I don't think it would have been that fun, and I just don't think the gameplay would have been that tight. Okay, the dance studio. You all knew this was coming in this video, right? It was announced in the Wrath trailer. This was supposed to be something that would let players customize their dances, and it was a wider push for more customization, which also included the addition of the barbershop that we currently know today. So we kind of did get something out of this development. While it could have been a cool novelty, I really think it would have been a waste of time, especially because animation just takes a really long time to do right. I just don't think it would have been an effective use of developer time. I think this is an example where cutting a kind of novel feature can be a really good idea because it frees up time to work on more effective content. We've seen nods to the dance studio, of course, in the Warlords of Draenor Garrison mission that referenced it. There's the Auction House Dance Party, of course, that's coming in patch 7.2.5, but yeah, I'm kind of happy for this one to just stay in the cutting room floor. And finally, I want to talk about some speculations. This is based off hunches and educated guesses, not overt sources. This is just a bit of fun to cap off the end of the video, so take what I'm about to talk about with a big pinch of salt. There is something strange going on with Naxxramas gear, okay? And indeed, there's something really bizarre going on with quite a lot of the weapons and armor in the game files with Wrath. While the player-facing names of the gear all sort of make sense, their names in the game files are kind of bizarre. Many of them reference other dungeons, and I have to wonder whether this sort of, is referencing maybe a different plan for the initial Wrath of the Lich King raid tier. Naxx, of course, got ported over, and that would have saved them a lot of time, especially for the art team. It seems like that is something that they only would have done if they really knew that they wouldn't have had time to develop what they maybe initially wanted for a full tier of new raids, rather than just the one boss, Eye of Eternity, and Sarth's Lair. Now, once again, this is pure speculation, but one has to wonder if there might have been plans for a raid content in Gundrak, Utgard, maybe even in Azjol-Nerub, but I think that was cut pretty early on in comparison to this stuff. But it is interesting, there's stuff from Naxxramas which say references Gundrak. And that's just a bit bizarre, a bit different, but it could just be down to the internal structure of how Blizzard were just dealing with their art assets. So I wouldn't put too much weight into it, but it's interesting to think about. Okay, so there we have it, a look at the content that was planned for Wrath of the Lich King, but did not end up making the cut. Honestly, most of it does seem reasonable to me, and even though we lost things like Azjol-Nerub, Wrath of the Lich King was still a hell of an achievement that marks World of Warcraft's greatest ever numerical success. In the next episode, we're going to be covering Cataclysm, by far one of the most interesting cases of cut content and a really interesting look into the development process. But until then, guys, thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.